Alicia, why are you always insinuating about Michael's current situation to me? Oh. Is there one? Probably because he was the only lawmaker of our time who fought for humanity. He was both the first lawmaker and a human named Michael. Absolutely. Ellie just smiled lightly when asked by Yayi. What about Mebius? Cut. The green little girl snorted coldly and didn't turn her head. Who else? Yayi covered her face. Pado. What? What? Jie Ge is also very concerned about Michael's boss. Get lost. Kevin. It's not exactly what you think. He has a more important meaning for us. To agree on a family to walk towards the future together. Keywords of the novel. The Fire Chaser of the Collapse World without a pop-up window, The Fire Chaser of the Collapse World TXT Complete Collection Download, the latest chapter reading of The Fire Chaser of the Collapse World. Chapter 1. Qualifications to become a witness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Qualifications to become a witness. Chicken soup is here. With Celia's cheers, the children became restless, and some even stood on chairs just to smell the aroma of chicken soup earlier. Even the pink-haired girl next to Michael is like this, even more active than the other children. Only he himself was an exception. As a proud soul-piercing uncle, he couldn't imitate the movements of a 10-year-old child. And, hey. What? It's chicken soup, but there's really only soup left. Isn't there still a piece of meat left? What do you know? That's called chili xiang. What is the relationship between chili xiang and chicken? I don't know. Michael said that a chicken butt is like a 7-mile fragrance. Celia maintained an awkward yet polite smile and lightly tapped Michael's head with a small wooden spoon. I know you've read a lot of books, but don't tell them all sorts of things. Michael stuck out his tongue and rolled his eyes. While a group of children were eager to drink hot chicken soup, he silently took a small piece of corn and turned to hand it to the girl next to him. Nah. Nah. The girl also happened to turn around holding a bowl, and the two seemed to be familiar with this tacit understanding. The girl didn't mind taking the corn from Michael's hand, and Michael silently took the soup handed by the girl. Corn is a rare item in orphanages. And the hot chicken soup helps to swallow the cold potatoes that make your teeth feel cold. Speaking of which, those strange uncles came again this morning. This is already the third time, isn't it? Doing a physical examination is really annoying. Michael's hand trembled, but the children were already chattering away. He secretly glanced at the girl beside him, who was bowing her head in silence. If it were in the past, she would definitely be the center of all children. Her words seemed never to stop, but her name is Alicia. It was Alicia, who was dressed up and smiling, but tears were unconsciously left behind. When she realized it, she had already broken through the dimensional wall and arrived in this world. He doesn't know why he came to this era destined to end, but since he is already here and now, so he reached out his finger and poked Elliot's chubby face. When she turned her head in a fit of anger and looked over, Michael had already shown a self-proclaimed warm smile. Then he hit Celia on the head again and said, Michael, don't keep bullying Ellie. Children, those uncles brought you flour and butter. How about I make cakes for you to eat tonight? Okay. After lunch, Michael returned to his room. His narrow bed was scattered with various books and drawings. The atomic arrangement structure of iron, the infiltration of carbon in steel, classic handheld firearm drawing of the last century. I don't know why, but he has been particularly interested in this type of book recently. No, it seems that the little boy had already started browsing chemical books before he occupied this body. This is certainly not something that 10-year-old children should be exposed to. At least for ordinary children. He sorted out his books and drawings and walked toward Celia's room, but stopped at the door. Celia's mother, I want to leave here. Alicia's voice came from the room, and Mikael pursed her lips, leaned against the wall, slowly lowering her head, unsure of what she was thinking. In no time, Alicia walked out and saw Mikael leaning against the wall at a glance. "Hey, why are you here?" She seemed a bit flustered. Mikael lifted his head, pursed his lips, but could not utter a complete sentence. "Hey. Why are your eyes turning red?" "You." Mikael quickly turned his head and said, "It's okay, it's okay. He was arguing while snorting a big snot bubble in his breath. He. Alicia was amused by his appearance. Mikael couldn't bear such a shameful look and quickly ran into Celia's room holding a book. Celia's mother. Puzzling. Celia laughed for the first time as she looked at the boy's constantly changing nasal mucus with his breathing. As she wiped Mikael's nose off, she asked, "What's wrong?" He took a deep breath and finally just said, "The date has arrived. I need to go and return the book, and also bring some back." "Go now, can't you make it back before sunset?" Celia originally intended to say that. But she knew why the young man had just cried. Or rather, she thought she knew why the boy was crying, so she couldn't bear to refuse the boy's request anymore. "All right then. Take these money and try to come back before dark." She rubbed the young man's smooth silver hair. Cough cough. The structural principles of modern mainstream mechatronics. You, as a child, are quite unique. In the bookstore, an old man with a pale face sat back on a lame chair. He glanced at the book held in the boy's hand in front of him and muttered in a voice that was almost imperceptible to human ears. Mikael took out 9 coins from his pocket and lined them up on the table. He was a bit nervous that the money was not enough to borrow this book. Or rather, not enough to borrow it and pay off the previous credit. As for why there were only 9 coins, it was naturally because of the cake in the box he was holding in his other hand. The old man leaned against the plastic board behind the chair and remained motionless for a long time. He didn't move, and Mikael didn't move for a moment. Banging. The thin door panel was blown open by the wind, and Mikael was startled and quickly wrapped his coat tightly around his body. But the old man still didn't move. Mikael let out a faint sigh that the child couldn't even utter, took 2 steps forward, and lifted the other person's sleeve. As expected, the purple veins have spread to the wrist. This kind of illness is collapse disease. Mikael retrieved 9 coins. The destined end is unfortunate for the elderly, but not necessarily for Mikael. At least he can save money and take away the elderly's scarf for warmth. As for reporting to the police or calling the hospital, it has long lost its necessity. For this small town called Vostok.51. No, soon, for the whole world, illness and death will become commonplace. It was already dusk when he left the bookstore. He should have walked faster, but today's footsteps were surprisingly heavy. Yes, no one is aware of the heavy burden that this era is about to bear. Only he has glimpsed a corner as a witness before. Night has quietly descended. Oh no, it will take a long time to rush back to the orphanage. Mikael quickly quickened his pace, but he promised Celia to go and return early. Moreover, he knew that Alicia would leave. He knew he couldn't stop her. So, he bought this cake just to use it to bid farewell to Alicia. After all, sweet cakes are the perfect match for beautiful girls. She would definitely say that. Sasha, that is the sound of boots stepping on the snow. Mikael suddenly turned back, even though the other person was hiding well and even intentionally following his footsteps, he finally heard the discordant charm. But he was wrong, there was no one in the snow behind him. The low houses on both sides emitted dim and warm lights, illuminating the footprints on the snow. There is no other person besides himself. He was also wrong and made a very serious mistake. That is, one should never expose one's back to darkness. Feeling the strange movement coming from behind, Mikael turned his head stiffly, only to see an enlarged version of a mosquito. No. No. Its wings are not tightly connected to its body, and purple energy flows out of its head in blocks. This is the collapsing beast. Michael's heart sounded an alarm, and beads of sweat kept rolling down his forehead, freezing in the wind and snow halfway through. The corner of his eye scanned around him quickly. Perfect, unable to find a baseball bat. Although it's useless to find him, he doesn't have the surname Kaslana and can't perform as well as a baseball bat should. Moreover, at this moment, this body is really just a child, but before the emotion called fear could completely spread, it underwent another transformation. That progressive collapsing beast did not launch an attack on Michael, but instead, with a slightly affectionate touch, came up against him. Why? Why? In the moment when the words fell, Michael suddenly understood why he would constantly read those obscure and difficult to understand books in a primitive impulse. He is not a genius. Of course, if we look at the definition for many years to come, he is indeed a genius. He just wants to move towards that so-called fate, that's all. Pa. The withered body of the advanced collapse beast and the book fell on the snow at the same time. Michael lowered his head and remained silent. Soon, the howling north wind above the town began to twist and bend, until it formed a vortex. The overflowing collapse can dye this gust of wind a light purple. At the center of the vortex was Michael's thin and small body. He began to run wildly, but not in the direction of the orphanage. Something seems to be coming out of my head. He needs to take advantage of his last moment of sobriety to stay away from this small town, so that not too many people can become dead due to the rapidly rising collapse. So I am the first lawmaker. With heavy eyelids, he could only see a glimmer of light in front of him. In a daze, the light seemed to turn pink. Although those who knew the laws of pre-civilization could not preserve human consciousness. Although it is well known that the rulers of previous civilizations cannot escape the fate of being killed. But he still held on to that unrealistic hope. But if it's a lawmaker, perhaps it has the qualification to become a witness. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Is no longer a witness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 is no longer a witness, far away. Far away. Even without looking back, Michael could feel that the light and warmth of civilization were gradually fading away from him. Finally, on the hill overlooking the brilliant lights of the city of Vostok, he stopped. The scattered collapse in the air could merge into his body one by one, condense on his chest, gradually solidify, but strangely emit a blue light. Behind him, the excess collapse energy scattered into the earth and merged into various living organisms, creating countless collapse beasts. He turned around, his eyes devoid of any emotional color. He glanced at the sparse lights behind him, then at the dazzling neon in front of him, waved his hand, and in the darkness, countless shattered beasts ran wildly, making a dull thunderous sound. Dee-dee dee-dee. Dee-dee dee-dee. Hello. This is the first team, and I am Captain Chen. Trace. Where are you now? Report to headquarters, we have left Vostok Point 51 and are currently at an abandoned base in the suburbs of Vostok. A noisy voice came from the other end of the walkie-talkie. In a moment, a female voice that made people feel goosebumps just by listening came. Scar, the response of the collapse near you is rapidly increasing, with a magnitude exceeding 1000 HW and constantly climbing. The anomaly we caught before is not unfounded. This. Even though she felt that she had experienced countless battles, when she heard this news, she almost didn't grasp the walkie-talkie in her hand. As a special task force directly under the coalition government, their mission has always been to fight against collapse. A disaster that closely follows the development of civilization, and to disguise the damage it causes as accidents. But so far. No, the strongest collapse reaction he had encountered before this one was just over 100 HW, and the disaster caused by that collapse was enough to mobilize two teams like them, along with one mecha team and one flying squadron, to quell. So what will emerge from the 1000 HW collapse reaction? Captain Trace, Captain Trace. The first male voice came from the walkie-talkie again. A large number of collapse beasts have been detected approaching Vostok. In addition, the collapse can accumulate on the northwest mountain, and the reaction intensity has reached 1400.15000. It is approaching 2000 HW. Shen took a deep breath, counted the few ammunition, and began to wear exoskeleton armor. Because they are using public frequency, all members of the team understand the current situation and spontaneously start preparing for battle. Headquarters, what is our task? As the outermost defense line of Vostok, it blocks the advance of the collapsing beasts. The city of Vostok has been under martial law under the guise of a military exercise, and you only need to hold on for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, the flying squadrons from the Shenzhou and Far East regions will arrive on the battlefield, and within half an hour, the mecha troops will arrive. Ha! Chen took a gentle breath and immediately cut off contact with the headquarters. Do you all hear me? Hurry up and move. Before the shattered beast arrives, search for ammunition supplies in the base first. And at this moment, Mikael. No, he is now the first lawmaker, and his thin figure still stands on the mountaintop. Decades later, gunshots rang out at the edge of the distant lights, and bullets pulled straight paths in the darkness. Countless shattered beasts fell, and countless shattered beasts followed suit. But until there was no more collapsing beast around him, the first Law One remained motionless. He seems to be waiting for something. As an apostle descended from the gods on earth, he should not and cannot possess emotions. So he doesn't understand this kind of waiting, nor does he understand this kind of waiting. Just as he didn't understand, why did he not put down the cake in his hand until the body was completely occupied by him, until the soul of the body was directly erased by a higher existence? Sasha, the sound of light footsteps echoed behind him. Mikael. Mikael. The first lawmaker is not aware of the meaning of the name Mikael. But he never felt a familiar aura on anyone. He turned around and realized that she had been quietly following him, a beautiful girl with pink hair. What's wrong with you? The girl's voice was blown away by the wind. She seemed both excited and wary. Why has your hair grown so much longer? Oh my, your eyes are also red. Why, isn't it too sad to hear that I'm leaving? Can't we just leave together? The first lawmaker remained silent. He is not mute, just the girl across from him, the girl who is also a divine apostle like himself. Why? Does she seem to have human-like emotions? The girl chattered incessantly, saying things that the first lawyer couldn't understand, while slowly approaching him. I thought that encountering the same type of first law practitioner did not feel threatened. Hey! Is this cake prepared for me? The girl happily took the cake box he was holding in his hand. You really understand a girl's thoughts. A beautiful girl, of course, should be paired with a sweet cake. Haha. At the moment when the word "law" fell, a dagger slipped out of the girl's sleeve and stabbed directly at the heart of the first lawmaker. When the dagger suddenly encountered an obstacle and bent nearly 90 degrees, it broke with a loud bang. At some point, a steel plate appeared between the severed dagger and the chest of the first lawmaker. This is the power of those who abide by the law of reason. Despite being a messenger of the destruction of civilization, one must rely on the power of civilization to fight. Alicia failed a single blow, but did not retreat. Instead, she unexpectedly made a left hook and hit the face of the first lawmaker fiercely. You! Give me back Mikael. Return Mikael to me. Mikael! Give it back. Me! Alicia's shout entered the mind of the first lawmaker, like a stone thrown into the calm lake, instantly rippling in circles. Alicia! Mikael suddenly opened his eyes. What catches the eye is chaos, without light or darkness. Alicia! The once shattered memory began to shine brightly, and the familiar voice rang in my ears. Visitors, your path will continue. To create something we couldn't embrace. Let's go to the future. So there was light, so there was darkness, and time began to flow, so Mikael saw his own conscious world. His original position has been replaced by an indescribable mist. At the foot of the fog, there was a body of a child who was exactly the same as him. No, it was the body of a child named Mikael. He instantly understood. His occupation did not cause the consciousness of the child named Mikael to dissipate, but instead fell into a deep sleep. And while the collapse shaped the lawmaker, it erased the consciousness of Mikael, the child, but unexpectedly, there was a third consciousness in this body. Since that's the case. Mikael walked step by step towards the mist. Is this the consciousness of the lawmaker? Since I can appear in front of her. How could I be willing to be a witness again? Outside of consciousness, Alicia was entangled with the figure of the first law one. The first law practitioner is free to manipulate the collapse energy, and Alicia is no exception. Therefore, even if it appears to be a child's battle, every interaction between fists and feet can even instantly paralyze an adult. The first law one should not have fought in this way. His authority should be analysis construction. But after all, he was a newborn consciousness and didn't know how to play to his strengths and avoid his weaknesses, so he was quickly dragged into a fight. The first lawmaker's movement suddenly stopped, and the next moment, just before Alicia's fist arrived, he suddenly slapped himself. Subsequently, the left and right hands of the first lawmaker began to fight, followed by the left and right feet. Until the roar of fighter jets came from the sky, countless bombs fell on the shattered herds, stirring up a bloody storm and rendering the night as if it were day. The first lawmaker lay dead, motionless. No matter how strong he is just a newborn consciousness. How can he defeat Mikael? Me, Mikael. Is that you? Have you come back? This is the first sentence he heard when his consciousness returned to his body. Also, the heavenly sound that supported his progress in the vast years that followed. The fighter jet dropped a bomb towards the top of the mountain, causing the tail wings of the projectile to rub against the air and emit a piercing whistling sound. Alicia, I'm back. Amidst the exploding fireworks, Mikael declared his return to Ellie. The explosive fireworks did not reach the eyes of the two children. At the chest, the blue core of the lawmaker finally formed, and the gear-like pupils rotated. The spherical barrier gradually solidified into a solid entity, isolating all fragments from the flames. This is the first time Mikael feels so real about himself in this world. Because he is no longer a witness. But people who have truly stepped into the river of fate. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The beginning of the fire chaser. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The beginning of the fire chaser. The blood-red lights flickered, accompanied by a piercing alarm sound. The thick composite armor doors slowly closed, and between the metal gaps, gears rubbed against each other to make a click-click-click sound. White mist escaped, adding a hint of haziness to the steel-filled base. At the moment before the gate closed, the light of the morning sun shone through the final gap, coating the silver moth on the walls of the base with a layer of gold. However, in the next moment, the dazzling fluorescent lamp lit up, reflecting everything as pale as the snow outside the gate of the base. The logistics department is providing daily maintenance for exoskeleton experts of large mechas and soldiers, such as Bang Bang, Kaka, and Zizi. Tap, 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 a bright red flame swept through the crowd and arrived at the spacious training ground. Stand at attention. Take a break. Baimehu nodded in satisfaction as he watched the neat and uniform movements of the 20 team members. Her face seemed to have a hint of fatigue, but in the moment she faced the team members, it was concealed by a resolute expression. From now on, the 5th team will enter a level 1 combat readiness state and be ready to deploy at any time. Everyone, do you understand the meaning of this command? Understood. The so-called level 1 readiness state means that according to computer predictions, the concentration of collapse energy in some areas is about to rise to the level of large-scale collapse. I don't know where the collapse happened again. It's not my house. Oh my. Dealing with the collapsing beast is not a problem, but finding a suitable excuse afterwards is also too difficult. That's right. Every time it's a military exercise, they don't believe it anymore. Didn't someone else expose a video of us fighting against the Smash Beast online before? Fortunately, the network department acted quickly. But when will these days end? After the disbandment, soldiers without training tasks got together in 2s and 3s. Some were afraid of being destroyed and stealing their homes, and most of them were roast about their aftercare work. Only no one is worried about the possible battle. That's right, although the 5th team was the latest team to be formed, it can still stand here despite the increasing frequency of collapses and explosions. Which one wasn't rolled out in a circle of blood? Moreover, some people have already contracted the disease of collapse, and the long-term future for them is more like a knowing and impossible comfort. Compared to that, the doubling of allowances during the preparation period and the winning wine and dances after the battle are more attractive to them. But there are 2 new recruits who are different. It has been 6 years since the first collapse occurred. After escaping from Vostok, Mikael and Ellie went to many places, met many people who would meet again in the future, and secretly eliminated many disintegrating beasts. At the end of the journey, the 2 also made the same decision. To join the anti-collapse organization that had been reorganized as the Fire Moth. Although Mikael is a lawmaker, the core of the lawmaker only contains a small amount of collapse energy. As long as he does not actively connect to the imaginary tree to gain power, the fire-chasing moth can only conclude that his collapse energy adaptability is excellent. It is precisely because of its excellent resistance to collapse that the Fire Moth, who has not yet experienced severe collapse and insists on not admitting minors, made an exception and agreed to join the 2. Oh my, it's really troublesome. I originally wanted to invite you to see Eden's performance. Did you buy the ticket? No. Mikael sighed and smiled helplessly, I knew it. Oh, don't always worry. You look like you're carrying a lot of heavy things, not as cute as when you were a child. Mikael closed the book in his hand and replied with a wry smile. Alicia, first, you just told me yesterday that I always had a stiff face when I was young. He doesn't want to live an easier life. But he is the only one who knows the ending, and the heavy burden he carries invisibly constantly forces him to move forward, turning into a book that he rarely puts down in his hands. After all, the power of those who want to use the law of reason well cannot be separated from various knowledge. The question is, if he really exposes his identity as a lawmaker, who else in this world besides Ellie can accept him? What about the second one? Alicia poked him on the cheek. Mikael regained his composure and felt a bit angry. If this is the second collapse, don't you have anything to say? Alicia nodded clearly, understanding the other person's meaning, which stemmed from the lawyer's intuition. But she doesn't care, she still has some expectations. Hey, what's wrong with your eager expression? Ellie pouted, you can't even guess that. Of course, I was thinking of waking up this guy too. Just like waking you up back then. Alicia. Ellie. It's nothing. Mikael put down the book in his hand, put on his helmet, and walked on the way to the gathering. He has never told Alicia the truth. After all, it is impossible to tell the truth to Alicia with one's own mouth. Once the rulers of this generation are born, there is no possibility of them becoming humans again. There are only 2 exceptions. One is because Mikael himself had a bug with his soul-piercing card. Another thing is the girl who is not yet clear about this is as dazzling as flying flowers. And equally important is that humans are not yet aware of this. Perhaps from the moment this organization was named, Fire-Chasing Moth, it had already revealed the fate of this civilization. What a ironic name. Isn't the so-called flame-chasing moth just a moth that pounces at the flames one after another and is then burned up? The second collapse. Mikael muttered to himself as he walked ahead alone. The pink crystal rose condensed into a solid on his hand, but in the style of a brooch, the edges were a bit too sharp. Oh, how about this brooch? Do you want me to help you put it on with my own hands? He stiffly changed the topic. The girl showed a surprised expression. Ah! What a beautiful crystal flower, it really suits me. You said it. Come and put it on for me with your own hands. Behind that flawless smile, does she really know nothing? Sometimes, Mikael would also be so skeptical. Pinning the crystal rose to her chest, Ellie suddenly put her hands behind her back and shook her shoulders slightly. Don't hide it, what do you want me to do for you? Ellie gave a sly smile and casually grabbed Mikael's shoulder. Although it was a bit inappropriate to mention it, Mikael, don't you think? A beautiful girl should not only have a beautiful brooch, but also a unique medal. Mikael held her breath and tried to make her tone appear normal and natural. Unique. Mikael removed the fire-chasing emblem from his chest, which was made of alloy and engraved with a moth. The circular ring in the center of the badge is made of unknown materials, and even if it is only a glimmer of light, it will refract a blazing stream of light. On the back of this badge, there is a string of characters engraved. MSA.014, in terms of universal rationality, each person's medal is unique, right? This badge cannot reflect Alicia's unique beauty, cuteness, and gentleness. What I want is truly unique. Unique. That's the only one left, right? Mikael scratched his head. He had already guessed Alicia's goal, but he felt a little nervous just thinking about that. He sighed slightly and said, even if I don't help you, you will still get it yourself, right? With me around, at least I can erase all the trouble you may have caused. Oh my. I knew it. Mikael is the best to me. But that badge. How are you going to get it? Besides, even if you get it, you can't wear it openly, can you? Roughly speaking, it's one thing to wear it, isn't it another thing? You will definitely help me, right? My good Mikael. Mikael was about to grit her teeth and agree to Alicia's request, but was interrupted by the piercing alarm. Alert! First level combat readiness. All team leaders are requested to immediately gather in the combat conference room. Repetition. First level combat readiness. All team leaders are requested to immediately gather in the combat conference room. Repetition. First level combat readiness. All team leaders are requested to immediately gather in the combat conference room. What's going on? Mebius walked into the battle conference city and immediately saw the constantly refreshing numbers on the huge display screen. A large number of collapse energy reactions have occurred in the city of Urkun on the Eurasian continent, and the concentration of collapse energy is 990 HW 1000 HW 1200 HW. Although we made a successful prediction a few hours in advance, I regret to inform everyone that since the time 6 years ago, humanity has once again experienced a collapse with an energy response exceeding 1000 HW. Famas stood in front of the electronic screen and said in a deep voice. Dr. Mebius. Someone questioned, and his words instantly caused a commotion. Mebius glanced around and indeed did not see the prominent green long hair in the crowd. Ahem. Famas coughed heavily, and the city of the battle meeting fell silent in an instant, with only the sound of alarms echoing continuously from the broadcast. Dr. Mebius has important matters to attend to and will not participate in this operation for the time being. However, she is not originally affiliated with a combat position, and even without her participation, it will not have much impact on everyone, will it? A few captains nodded helplessly as they looked at me and at you. The man's words were indeed correct, and everyone's confusion was only because this was Dr. Mebius's first absence from a combat meeting. Moreover, Dr. Mebius's command level. Let's forget about it. Bimihu did not participate in these discussions, but stared intently at the jumping numbers on the screen until it stopped at 1800 HW. The city of Urkyun. Bimi exclaimed in silence. If she remembered correctly, this place seemed to be a former military base of our country. In this battle against the collapse, only the 1st to 4th squadrons will be deployed, and the remaining mecha and air forces will be directly mobilized from the Shenzhou branch. You may have any objections. Famas quickly arranged the combat mission. Command. Bimi shouted and stepped forward, her fiery hair instantly becoming the focus of everyone. Although the 5th team was formed the latest, I believe my team members also have the strength to participate in this battle. Famas nodded first, then shook his head and said, Bimihu, you go first to convey standby instructions to the 5th team, and then come to me alone. Between his eyes, Bimihu seemed to understand something. According to the soldier's intuition, she understood that gaze meant. There was a more important task entrusted to you. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Collapse comes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 5. Snake's Gaze. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Snake's Gaze. Dong dong dong, open the door, check. Before Mikael could finish speaking, the doors of the laboratory opened layer by layer, and dark green light and shadow seeped out like water overflowing from a cup. Entering the interior of the laboratory, Mebius was facing away from the two of them, holding a document and sketching. And on the chair in front of her, there was a soldier with a pale face, whispering something. What's up with finding me? She casually stuck her green hair behind her head, and her tone was also somewhat impatient. Doctor, we need to retrieve your badge, Alicia said in a low voice. Retrieve my seal. So suddenly. Why? Although it was just a simple question, the temperature in the room visibly decreased. And? Is it necessary to wear a gas mask when coming to my laboratory? Because the distribution system for badges has been modified, these numbered badges need to be recycled and processed. In the future, badges will be in non-numbered versions. As for gas masks. Safety first, Doctor. Cut. Mebius just turned around and looked up and down at the two strangers in front of him. Perhaps out of some intuition, or perhaps because the request to recycle the badge came so strangely, Mebius always felt that there was something wrong with these two people. But she ultimately didn't notice any clues. Okay, I got it. She stopped asking, perhaps it was unnecessary, or perhaps she felt that saying another word to these two people was a waste of time and life. She walked quickly to the test bench, opened one drawer after another, and countless penalty notices drifted through the laboratory as she searched. Mikael counted a few more, a full 19. Finally, in the corner of the bottom drawer, she found the badge with the 1 engraved on the back and handed it to Mikael. Take it. She casually swung it and patted it on Michael's sleeve. Mikael quickly grabbed the medal and then looked down at his watch imperceptibly. It had been 2.5 minutes since the alarm sounded. The gathering time was only 5 minutes. So he answered before Ellie. Thank you for your cooperation, Dr. Mebius. The new badge will be delivered to your laboratory within a week. Then the two of them will hastily leave. Wait a minute. Don't think I know nothing. Mikael rubbed his palms, his heart beating with a thud. He didn't know where Mebius had noticed the flaw, and for a moment there seemed to be no better plan than to escape. Doctor, I don't quite understand what you mean. He kept evading, ready to carry Alicia and escape at any moment. I know you all want to keep it from me, even making various excuses to keep me in the laboratory and not let me go out. But if you want to know something, you don't necessarily have to see it with your own eyes. Mikael slowly made a question mark and then swallowed her whole heart back into her stomach. It seemed that what she was going to say next had nothing to do with the two of them. Collapse. How is the situation now? Oh, doctor, so what you're asking is this matter. Mikael could feel Alicia beside her also breathe a sigh of relief. Well. How to put it, the situation is not very optimistic. However, this is only temporary. Where are Mikael and Alicia? Beamy frowned and asked. Everyone has been fully armed and assembled. The fifth team only has 20 soldiers in total, and there is no need for the counting process. She glanced over and saw that only those two new recruits were missing. The soldiers who were asked were also bewildered. Those two new recruits with incredible physical fitness are really not easy to get in touch with. That girl named Alicia seems to be everywhere, always gossiping and meddling in her affairs, but when it comes to searching, no one can explain her whereabouts clearly. And that young man named Mikael is even more eccentric, hardly talking to anyone except Alicia, holding various books all day long, to the point where his presence is extremely low, let alone where he goes. Baimihu looked at the watch. There are only 19 seconds left until the end of the 5-minute gathering time. 18, 17, 16, It seemed like something flashed in front of him. Baimihu looked up and saw that the two new recruits were already fully armed and standing in the queue. Depart immediately. The heavy door had already been opened, and the transport helicopter flew straight towards the vast snowfield. I just want to emphasize once, our mission is not to fight against the monster named Lawmaker, but to enter the underground base of Urkian City and protect the collapse energy storage tank there. The specific location has been sent to everyone's battle map. Do you still have any questions? No. At this moment, the driver's voice came through the broadcast. The transport helicopter will arrive on the battlefield in 2 minutes, please prepare for the fifth team. Boom. The flames of the explosion ravaged the cabin, accompanied by the cold and howling wind, as well as the weightlessness brought by the rolling. Mikael was dragged out by the air pressure before he could figure out what was going on. Ellie. She hurriedly pulled down his hand, but immediately followed him and took off. The two of them clasped their hands tightly together, and taking advantage of the tumbling opportunity, Mikael only saw a dozen or so small black spots thrown out of the belly of the transport helicopter that had ruptured. Many members of the fifth team reacted at the moment they were thrown out of the cabin and pulled out emergency parachutes. A height of over 100 meters is not enough to slow down the parachute, and only a small portion of these people can survive with excellent physical fitness and protection from exoskeleton armor. For Mikael, his ability is completely capable of trying to save them, but 4 or 5 seconds passed in an instant, and he suddenly grabbed Alicia tightly in his arms. In the moment before landing, a large cushion bed suddenly appeared on the ground, catching the two of them. Bang! The air cushion bed was directly shaken into energy fragments, drifting in the air, and the waist-deep snow was thrown into the air at a height of more than 10 meters, exposing the pitch-black and hard-frozen soil on the ground. Even though both of them have extraordinary physical fitness, the impact of the moment of landing makes people feel like their bones are about to break into pieces, their exoskeleton armor is shattered and ineffective, their heads are buzzing, and their gaze is constantly rolling and rotating, as if they have turned in place for thousands of times. Especially Mikael, he endured the impact of Alicia and could only hold on to his chest, coughing for a while. When the two of them crawled out of the snow pit in embarrassment, they saw a barefoot purple-haired girl standing in front of them. What a coincidence. Meeting you here. Traitor. She has a human face and speaks human language, but her voice is flat and lifeless, without any emotion. Alicia wanted to say something, but was guarded by Mikael behind him. His eyes instantly turned blood red, and his pupils turned into the shape of gears. The deep blue shield quickly constructed in front of him, while the second lawmaker nearby casually opened a black hole, and a missile flew out, directly blasting Mikael and Alicia away. Confirming that no other soldiers were present, Mikael constructed 2 railguns on the way back and fired them towards the second law. "Where are you aiming?" The second law is expressionless. She walked barefoot on the snow-covered ground, letting her purple long hair fly without even using her power to change the trajectory of the railgun's shells. Without a doubt, those 2 shells flew over her head and exploded on the nearby snowfield. Alicia. Run. Watching the first lawmaker who had deviated from the collapse choose to flee, the second lawmaker tilted his head. She really didn't expect to meet the first law one here, as they seem to have joined the human camp, but he is also too vulnerable to a single blow. Wait. The second lawmaker turned around, and the explosion just now raised a sea of ice and snow, which fell like a tsunami, as if about to engulf her. That's it. She tore open the space and in the next moment, she appeared on another hill. Oh my. Hello. What? The second lawyer turned back again, this time, the reflection in her eyes, except for the annoying pink, was only an inverted stock of the gun. Bang, the stock of the gun shattered, and the second lawmaker was thrown away like a baseball. And where she fell, as expected, the annoying first lawmaker had already set up a railgun. The gear-like pupils locked onto the target. In the laboratory illuminated by green lights, Mebius looked at the pocket screen in front of him, playing images from a tiny camera glued to someone's sleeve, and couldn't help but add a sentence. Fire. Hee, I really didn't expect that. I just wanted to learn about the situation outside, but I found such an interesting thing. Her eyes flickered bright and dark, reflecting a green glow. That's from the snake's gaze. But the next moment, the image in the camera spun around and landed on a red snowfield. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. He attempts to drown a fish. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. He attempts to drown a fish. The spear of Yakong is not sharp, but the spatial power attached to it is the most deadly blade, easily cutting off Mikael's right arm. At the same time, the muzzle of the railgun shook, and the projectile that flew out had just left the muzzle, as if it had hit a thin film. The entire space twisted visibly until it was submerged. Ellie. The tip of the spear of Yakong remained about an inch in front of Mikael's chest, and she quickly turned to dodge. The pink crystal rose held between the lovely Alicia's fingers still cut off half of her hair. Alicia's speed can reach such a level that second-law practitioners would never have imagined. Although she had never thought about these either. Without human emotions, she relies more on instinct in combat. And the instinctive warning is not to get into close combat with these 2 people. Not unwilling, but unnecessary. The spatial fissure opened up beside her, and jumping in space was just an instinct for her like eating and drinking water. But this time, she couldn't succeed. Mikael grabbed her with his remaining left arm, while his right arm rapidly grew into a miniature electromagnetic pulse gun. Bang! Bang! 2 loud noises came almost simultaneously, with electromagnetic pulses hitting the chest of the second lawmaker. Mikael's abdomen was hit by a pale purple cylindrical energy body, and the 2 of them instantly flew backwards. And Alicia, who was supposed to chase and beat the lawyer fiercely, hesitated slightly, slowed down a bit, and only tore off a piece of clothing from the lawyer as he slipped into the crack in space. Cough. Without the blessing of the lawmaker's power, the energy pillar slowly dissipated, and Mikael wiped away the bloodstain from the corner of his mouth and stood up with the help of Ellie. At the right arm, the electromagnetic pulse gun gradually decomposed, revealing a slightly pale arm. He shook his hand, although it was not the first time he had reconstructed a certain part of his body. Every time a new limb was born, it became a bit uncomfortable. It seems that as a lawmaker, she seems to be a bit stronger than you, Mikael. Should it be said that she is truly Alicia, and even in this situation, she still remembers to joke. Mikael impatiently poked her cheek. Let's go, since we can't stop her, we can only continue with the task that the fifth squad should have been carrying out. I don't know how Captain Baimehu and his team are doing. We're in a hurry, our exoskeleton armor and communication equipment are all down. Let's search and see along the way. Although he said that, once he calmed down and listened to the intense sound of artillery explosions in the distance, he couldn't help but feel a little dissatisfied. The battle just now was just a short moment, but he consciously did his best, but it was still a bit inferior to the second law. Perhaps the other party is really just fighting by instinct. Because it relies on complete instincts without any thoughts, every action and collapse that the body makes and every flow within the body is the most natural and rapid choice. She can even achieve a dual purpose, using her power to condense the spear of Yakong and cut off Mikael's arm, while also tearing open space in time and swallowing the shells fired by the railgun. In Mikael's view, it's like one person eating with a pair of chopsticks in each hand at the same time, and it's impossible for ordinary people to have both hands handy. Anyway, Mikael seemed to be talking to Ellie or muttering to herself, that blow just now at least hurt her. Her power cannot quickly repair her limbs like I do. To heal herself or even further her power, she must absorb the collapse energy stored in the underground foundation, which is ours. At this point, he suddenly froze and stopped in his tracks. Since the second law does not possess human nature and all actions are instinctive, then the collapse energy is like fish to cats, meat to dogs, and small monsters to her. In short, if instinctively, she should be able to absorb the collapse of the underground base as soon as possible. It's absolutely impossible to stay until now. So which link went wrong? It is indisputable that the actions of the second lawmaker are instinctive, so the problem must lie in the collapse energy. On the basis that the collapse energy storage tank is well preserved, she should not know the fact that underground bases store collapse energy. The task of the fifth team suddenly became unnecessary. Is it possible that the commander of the fire-chasing moth, Famas, had a spicy idea in his mind, or that he made a misjudgment and mistakenly believed that the other party knew about the existence of the collapse energy storage tank? But this doesn't make sense. The center of the collapse outbreak is the city of Urkyun, and Famas should be very clear that the fifth squad cannot feel the underground base before the lawmaker. There is only one possibility left. The commander's plan is to use the savings jar that stores a large amount of destructive energy as bait to attract the lawyer to take the bait and kill her through some means. But with the combat effectiveness of the fifth team, is it possible to kill the lawmaker through conventional means? No. Mikael put himself in a different position and thought that the most reliable solution that Famas could come up with was to directly open the collapse energy storage tank, hoping that the radiation formed by the massive collapse energy would cause the fifth team and the lawmaker to perish together. The only imperfect aspect of a perfect plan is that it is actually a gamble. The adaptability of the gambler's collapse is not infinite, but has a threshold. I'm sorry. The collapse of the lawmaker can adapt, it seems like it's really infinite. Mikael never believed that there would be fish drowning in the sea in the world, just like he did not believe that there would be a lawmaker who could survive from excessive collapse. Forget it, there's no need to set a flag more seriously, if this method is effective. No, even if it is ineffective. The problem with doing so is that the lawmaker receives a massive supply of collapse energy, and unless silver bullets are used, humans have almost no means of countermeasures. For the second lawmaker, it's hard to say whether the silver bullet exploded on her head or was passed by her to explode on a human city's head. What's wrong, Mikael? Seeing him stop still, Alicia asked in confusion. It was the first time she had seen Mikael show such an ironclad expression. Not to mention that this iron stain quickly turned pale, as if seeing something terrible. Buzzing. Sizzling. Crackling. Sizzling. The sound of electric current came from the snow beneath her feet, and before Mikael could make any movement, Ellie had already taken out the object that made the sound. Hey! Is this a miniature earphone? ZZ. ZZ. Is this someone talking? Mikael took the earphone with a flick of his index finger, and a faint moan came from within. This is the captain of the 5th team, Baimihu. Members who can still move should hear this message and quickly rush to the target location. This is the captain of the 5th team, Baimihu. Members who can still move should hear this message and quickly rush to the target location. This is the captain of the 5th team, Baimihu. Members who can still move should hear this message and quickly rush to the target location. The night gradually darkened. Is it a recording? Alicia asked. No, it's the captain who keeps shouting. The relevant information and timeline of the Bong San paradise are too complicated, but the amount of information provided after truly sorting it out seems to be not much. I am completely numb. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Himiko's Attack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Himiko's Attack. In the suburbs of Urkyun, massive collapsing beasts and numerous dead roam the deserted permafrost. Buildings, roads, and even pine trees standing upright on the roadside, these traces of human civilization have been recklessly destroyed, leaving only a mess under the dim moonlight. Baimihu leaned tightly against the wall, moving her step by step. Only when the sound of gunfire came from the distant mountain veins did she suddenly erupt, taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was attracted and quickly darting across 1 or 2 streets. But this time, even though there were only 2 blocks left from the entrance of the underground base, and the sound of gunfire had echoed back and forth more than 10 times, she remained motionless. Because now, at the crossroads, there is a tank-level collapse beast with a height exceeding 10 meters. The so-called elephant has no comparability with it at all, because the deep pit stepped out by the thick front legs of this collapsing beast is as big as a living room. Its body completely fills the streets, and even in the face of such a behemoth, it is difficult to erase the fear from the bottom of its heart. Gollum. She silently swallowed her saliva. Car. The collapsing beast made a strange cry and made a hard turn in the narrow street. It seemed to smell something and started walking towards the corner where Baimihu was hiding. Boom. 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 Baimihu's shoulders trembled with the ground as she looked back at the darkness behind her. The bodies of the only 2 soldiers in the 5th team who she would fight with remained there, leaving her with no other choice. She moved her stiff knuckles and held on to the cold sword. Among the entire 5th squad, she was the only one who used cold weapons for the first time. The reason is also very simple. She is a rare and highly resistant individual among the fire-chasing moth, so she can use her collapse ability to fight on a small scale, although the cost is the gradually spreading purple stripes on her arms. I may not necessarily lose to you. A white incandescent lamp flickered inexplicably among the rubble of the ruins, reflecting a blazing knife light. The seemingly heavy and unsheathed sword easily severed the huge front legs of the tank-level collapse beast. The shattered beast let out a mournful cry and fell forward. Without hesitation, Baimihu twisted his waist, allowing the heavy sword to rotate along with his body, and finally plunged straight into the lowered head of the shattered beast. The purple paste like mucus splashed everywhere, and the shattered beast lost its vitality for the first time. Baimihu herself didn't expect that although it was usually easy for her to slay the collapsing beast, it was only 2 or 3 meters tall, and some were even taller than humans. It was the first time she had ever encountered something so huge. So, in the same way, if ordinary warriors can also use the power of collapse to fight, unfortunately, her camera has been damaged and she cannot upload the sword she just made to the database of the fire-chasing moth. And she didn't have the time to ponder anymore. The strong smell of blood and the mournful cries of the shattered beast before its death had already exposed her position. She quickly climbed up the body of the shattered beast, which was an excellent obstacle for the approaching enemy. Ha! As an ordinary person, I actually killed myself to the underground base. She chuckled to herself and flipped over the body. Then her smile froze. Outside, the snow and dust swept by the wind, she saw a silhouette slowly drifting towards her. The larger body than the chariot-level collapse beast just now, the huge shield blocking in front of it, and the towering spear, Jie Ge. The collapsing monster screamed and began charging towards her. Temple-level collapse beast. How many ghosts are still inside? Baimi tightly pursed her lips, and a drop of cold sweat fell from her temples, instantly condensing into frost. The advantage psychology brought by the recent battle was completely gone. This guy in front of me needs to use a 270mm railgun to eliminate it. Just as she was thinking about it, a roar suddenly came from the narrow street behind her, and shells dragged out long white lines in the night sky above her, instantly turning the temple-level shattered beast into debris. There really is a railgun. Know who is controlling the railgun. Zizizi. Zizizi. The long-lost sound of electricity came from the communication device pinned on my chest. Hello, hello. Hi. Captain Baimihu, are you okay? Mikael and I had a hard time catching up with you. I didn't expect the city to be so chaotic, almost lost. Hey. Alicia, stop talking and run. Ah. Mikael, please let me down. Baimihu helplessly stroked his forehead and said, these two new recruits really don't have any serious manners. I thought Mikael's child was a bit more stable. But thinking about it, the corner of her mouth curled up again, and a teardrop slid into the corner of her mouth along this curve. At least, the fifth team is still there, and besides her, there are still people fighting alive. But, where did they find weapons like railguns? That is a weapon that has not yet been officially installed and should be used in conjunction with spacecrafts in the plan. Perhaps Urkyun, as a former military base of our country, has retained some cutting-edge weapons. She didn't want to delve deeper into this issue, nor was it necessary, so she just casually found an excuse for herself to avoid it and didn't think much anymore. Rumble and bustle. The entrance to the so-called underground base is actually hidden in a residential area. Mikael and Alicia worked together to deal with the surrounding dead, and Baimihu inputted the password obtained by the fire-chasing moth from the coalition government. The underground base was covered with cement, and a 1-meter-thick alloy door made a loud noise before slowly opening. Slowly, the three of them even thought that something had malfunctioned. For 5 minutes, Alicia had already eliminated 3 waves of the dead and the collapsing beasts that came upon hearing the sound. The door only opened the gap that could accommodate one person's side entry, and the gap no longer widened, as if the parts inside were really stuck. I can't wait any longer, let's go first. Waving his hand, the strong musty smell dissipated, and Baimihu suggested while opening the communication device to contact headquarters. Headquarters, this is the 5th team, Baimihu. We have successfully reached the location of the collapse energy storage tank. Okay, everything goes according to plan. What about the situation over there? Command and reinforcement of mecha and drone units have deployed multiple defense lines at depths of several hundred kilometers, ready to launch plans at any time. However, Command. Obey orders. Yes. Apart from initially reporting the situation, Baimihu remained silent. She suddenly looked at Mikael, who was squeezing into the door sideways, and moved her lips. But in the end, no sound was made. What should she say? Do you want them to run quickly? This seems to have no meaning. Even if given a whole day, they cannot escape the radiation zone of the collapse energy. Besides, Mikael has already taken the lead in squeezing into the underground base. There is no enemy situation, currently no life forms have been found in the base. So Baimihu no longer hesitated. Ellie, you go first, come on. Alicia wiped the sweat on her forehead, which had become chilly, and struggled to squeeze in through the crack in the open door. After confirming that there were no casualties nearby, Baimihu also tried to squeeze in sideways. But she struggled for a moment and found it difficult to move forward further. It seemed like she was still trying to retreat in the middle, but unfortunately she couldn't. So she reached out her hand and looked at the two people inside the base who were almost eating melon seeds with some anger. "Give me a hand, it's stuck." Mikael tightly pursed her mouth, her expression somewhat unnatural, but Alicia covered her chest and laughed. She turned her head and gave Mikael a wink, but Mikael kept shaking her head. Alicia stuck out her tongue and walked forward, blocking Bimihu's waist through the gap in the door. "Come on, Captain Bimihu, take a deep breath." "Ah, no, it's a deep breath, don't worry about your waist circumference." Under the guidance of Alicia, Bimihu was finally pulled in. Before she could catch her breath, she quickly turned around, grabbed the handle on the door with both hands, and let out a loud shout. Hee hee. The heavy door closed instantly under her immense force. Mikael and Ellie exchanged a glance and shook their heads. He said to Ellie in spoken language, "It should just be because of her special physique. You can use a small amount of collapse to strengthen your body." Unexpectedly, Bimihu turned around and said without hesitation, "Everyone has secrets, and now I'm even with you." Mikael was stunned for a moment before realizing that she was talking about the railgun. He didn't pay much attention to himself, because the post-New Era Auntie Jie was exactly the same, even the pronunciation of her name was. Besides, she seemed to play a very important role in Chinese memory, so he didn't have much defense against Bimihu. Anyway, the other party can't find out the source of the railgun, so there shouldn't be anyone with such a big imagination as to think he can pinch the railgun with his bare hands, right? He remained silent, but felt a bit embarrassed in his low voice. "Let's go find the collapsed piggy bank. We still have a task to complete." Speaking of this matter, the atmosphere became even more silent for a moment. Bimihu suddenly regretted something. If these two children had just run away, what if they could really run out? Besides, even if you don't run out of the radiation zone and get infected with collapse disease, you can still live longer. She let out a short nasal sound. When he lifted his head again, the iconic resolute smile returned to his face. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The Law of Chasing Fire. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The Law of Chasing Fire. The underground base looks ordinary, not to mention the figures, not even a mouse was seen. Mikael was a bit disappointed. After all, the combination of the second law and Siberia was really easy to imagine. He even thought that this so-called military base of our country was the Babylonian tower of pre-civilization. I didn't expect that they were indeed a serious military base, without human experiments on those messy things. Apart from collapsing storage tanks and necessary electrical equipment, there was nothing left that could be dismantled or moved on the entire base, only scattered and disorderly electrical wires. Headquarters is calling the 5th Squadron. The saturation firepower attack on the lawbreakers has begun, and it is expected to consume the lawbreakers' energy within half an hour. Please receive instructions from the 5th Squadron. Bimihu suddenly reached out and turned off the communication device. They had been resting in front of the collapsed energy storage tank for a whole night. At first, the earth would occasionally tremble once or twice. At least it made her feel that the 5th team had not been completely abandoned. The last tremor was already 5 hours ago. At this time, the main force of the fire-chasing moth should have withdrawn to a distance of several hundred kilometers from the city of Urkyun, because once the collapse energy in the spherical container with a diameter of 3 meters leaked in front of her, the calculated radiation radius would be over 500 kilometers. "Mikael, Ellie, as the captain, I have something to apologize to you for." The voice of Bimihu was not loud, but it kept echoing in the narrow basement. She wanted to confess everything in the end, but Lovely Lee spat out her pink tongue and replied nonchalantly, "No need to say, Captain Bimihu, we all know. The headquarters idea is to let us leak a small amount of collapse energy, lure the law enforcement with insufficient energy here, and then release all the collapse energy in an instant, and die together with the law enforcement. Is that right, Captain Pamia?" Mikael silently added, holding his chest in both hands and leaning his back against the cold wall. "You." Bimihu didn't know how to speak for a moment. She pursed her lips, her eyes slightly sour, but in the end, she showed a truly relieved smile. Even though I guessed it, I still have to come, two fools. Don't say that, Captain Baimihu. Look, if we hadn't arrived in time, you wouldn't have been able to reach the underground base. Alicia poked her cheek with her finger and said with a smile. Cough cough. Mikael interrupted her chatter with a cough. Captain, let me be frank. This plan from headquarters is not feasible. After a moment of silence, Baimihu slowly closed his eyes and asked weakly, why not? If collapse can be compared to the ocean, then the lawmaker is the most active fish inside. How could a fish be drowned? Are you speculating? Or is there empirical evidence? Of course it's a guess. Empirical evidence. Mikael covered his forehead and said, Alicia, there's no need to hide anything from Captain Baimihu at this time. Captain Baimihu. Do you believe me? Mikael's tone carried a hint of anticipation. After a moment of contemplation, Baimihu nodded firmly and said, believe it. Okay. Mikael walked up to the collapsed energy storage jar and grabbed the switch at the jar mouth. I have another plan with a higher success rate, but when reporting to the fire moth later, I hope the captain can help me cover it up. What? What? The switch rotates gently, and in the tiny gaps, the intense and ultimate collapse can turn into wisps of purple smoke and scatter out. Baimihu's body stiffened and she unconsciously took a deep breath. She didn't know why she had an inexplicable trust in the young girl in front of her at that moment, and why she didn't stop the boy's action even though she had time. As if stunned, watching Mikael open Pandora's box ahead of time. What is he doing? To turn us into martyrs. Baimihu's mind flashed with such unrealistic fantasies. She had seen Dr. Mebius command researchers to perform live autopsies on the deceased and read their reports. She still remembers that the report mentioned that the dead were living beings formed by humans when they were exposed to the radiation of destructive energy beyond their innate adaptability. They need to endure the pain of their skin and body being shattered and gradually disintegrating into flying ash before death, but these feelings did not come to fruition. Under the shocked gaze of Baimihu, wisps of scattered collapse could flow into the young man's body like flowing water into the sea, without making any sound. What is this situation? Baimihu immediately thought of his own situation. I remember these two new recruits' resistance to collapse is exceptionally high. Are they just like me? No, even so, with ordinary bodies, it is impossible for them to withstand such a huge collapse. This is not a matter of metaphysics. It is a matter of science. 1 minute has passed, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. Collapse can continuously merge into Mikael's body, but he has always been as if nothing has happened. Alicia may have been a bit bored, but she ran straight to Baimihu's side and grabbed her arm. Captain Baimihu, the battle is over. You must thank us well. The corners of Baimihu's mouth twitched slightly, and in her eyes, talking about victory at such times was truly a fantasy. But she actually quite admires Alicia's personality. Wherever she goes, she is happy and full of hope for the future. This is rare among the fire-chasing moths who gradually become accustomed to death and despair, and then only live in the present, unwilling or afraid to envision the future. So she forced a smile and casually replied, okay, besides the celebration hosted by the fire moth, how about I give you 2 more tickets to Eden's concert? Hey! The concert tickets for the superstar Eden, the captain is going to bleed a lot. Small sample. Baimihu raised his hand and gave Ellie a surprise. Do you think I don't know about the fact that you found someone to buy tickets for Eden's concert a few days ago and were scammed out of money? Alicia didn't expect Baimihu to reveal this matter in front of Mikael. She instantly blushed, pouted with anger, and her eyes flickered, looking left and right, trying to ease the awkwardness. So you really went to buy it? Mikael tried to suppress his laughter as he couldn't help but recall the first time Ellie was deceived. It was a skinny brown-haired girl a few years younger than them. She tricked Ellie into an apple candy, but at that time, Ellie didn't care at all. By the time she was deceived for the second time, Ellie was already lying on the ground, rolling and crying and making noise at the same time. Perhaps this is the accumulation of human nature, huh? He exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, and all the collapse energy in the savings jar was sucked into his body. He couldn't help but recall the scene when he boasted to Ellie that he could drink 3 liters of water. As if the body was a huge balloon, the embroidery needle would burst open with a single thrust. "Are you ready, Alicia?" "Well, of course." Mikael turned his head slightly and looked at the stunned Bimihu with the corner of his eye. "Captain." "That's right, I am a lawmaker fighting for humanity, just like you, a moth chasing the flames." Boom. There was a loud bang above my head, and the ceiling was as sticky as paper, bursting with a bucket from the second lawmaker. The shattered rocks and soil seem to bury everything, but the light curtain constructed by Mikael isolates it all. Bimihu looked up, and from a distance of tens of meters, he could only see the purple figure the size of a grain of rice in the night sky, giving the illusion of a frog in a well. The collapse of the ground caused a large area of electrical wires in the base to short-circuit, and sparks spread along the hanging wires until they reached the feet of the self-proclaimed lawmaker. It really seems like chasing the flame of the future. "Headquarters, this is the frontline command center. We have detected a sharp increase in the response to the Urkian city's collapse, with a short-term increase of over 4,000 HW. Next, we will use drones for battlefield reconnaissance. Headquarters, we have discovered a large number of combat traces of mecha, railguns, and aerospace warships around the city of Urkian. We request confirmation of our troops' itinerary. Headquarters, no combat debris left by unknown troops has been found. Headquarters, the body of the lawmaker has been found, as well as the 5th squad and Captain Bimihu. They seem to be still alive." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Equivalent Exchange. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Equivalent Exchange. Mikael struggled to open a slit in his eyes, but what he saw was not the real world. In a daze, the ground on which my feet were treading was soaked from the pure white snowfield into blood-red sand and dust. "Mikael!" A familiar shout came from behind. Celia's mother. But when he turned around, all he saw was the dry and cracked ground, or the dilapidated or crumbling houses. Even so, he never forgot. This is the city of Vostok. The city he overlooked when he first became a lawmaker. How could this turn out like this? I'm not. Didn't I stop the second law one? Didn't I? No. He thought he wouldn't be sad, at least not so sad. Because he didn't have anything from the beginning, and all he wanted to save was Alicia alone. So, people often don't realize what weight these seemingly insignificant things have left in their hearts until they lose them. 1 drop, 2 drops. Something wet his face. Is it rainwater? He lifted his head, but the falling rain had a pitch-black color. It's like being born with a sin to bear. A strange sensation came from behind again. There was no sound or warmth, but Mikael felt something embracing him. A voice planted a seed in his mind, as if calling him back to his embrace. He suddenly had a strange premonition that he should and must turn back to see, but he was destined to be disappointed. He only caught a glimpse of a golden vine and began to fall rapidly in the darkness, as if being pushed. But there was no news in my ears. Gradually, a vague conversation sounded in his ear. "Dr. Spacey, what is the patient's current condition?" This is a sticky sound with a cold and damp touch. How to put it? Maybe my metaphor is a bit inappropriate. I can't find medical words to explain the patient's condition. His brain is now like a overloaded CPU that's almost burning out. What about other places? Is there anything unusual in his body? No, his body tissue is no different from normal humans, except that his ability to collapse is extremely adaptable. In addition, he has a small amount of collapse energy in his body. However, considering his warrior identity in Captain Pimiho's report, I think this is a normal phenomenon. Spacei, you should know how to tell them, right? Dr. Mebius, I don't understand what you mean. Wait a moment, it seems that our patient has already woken up. The pale light made his eyes tingle, and he couldn't help but squint. But as this gaze swept over the green-haired woman sitting by the hospital bed, he showed a sincere expression of being unable to be loved. He quickly sorted out the current situation he had to face. He didn't know if Bimihu had guessed the identity of the heteronomy in the end, but anyway, she did keep her promise and concealed the truth from the fire-chasing moth. Otherwise, Mikael felt that he wouldn't be in such a ward. He should have been in prison or on the dissecting table of Mebius. The reason why lies are lies is because they cannot hide from everyone. At least the person in front of them seems to be unable to hide. Mikael examined his body and found that his core of law was missing. It should be Alicia who did it, otherwise with that core alone, he should be on the dissecting bed now. Alright, Spacei, you can take the report to them. I have something to say to this patient privately. Speaking like this, Mebius did not let him leave immediately. Instead, he took the case report from Spacei's hand, edited it, and threw it to him. Spacei shrugged, as if he had anticipated this situation long ago. He took the modified case and turned around to leave the ward. Mebius knocked on the iron railing on the hospital bed and said, "All right, my lovely patient, there's no third party here now. You have to answer all the questions carefully." Mikael chuckled twice, as if he was answering Mebius' words. "You should also be aware of what I'm asking, right? And you should also be aware that they have already asked those two people the same question. What happened to the last mechs, railguns, and warships in the battle against the lawmakers?" Mikael silently pondered. What lame excuse would she use if it were Ellie? Cough cough, that was the last blow of the lawmaker after absorbing all the destructive energy. She seemed to want to construct the products of human civilization in a mimetic way. As you know, the purpose of destruction is to destroy civilization, so her manipulation of these products of human civilization was actually backfired. Anyway, we don't know what's going on, but those things that were clearly created by her attacked her in the opposite direction. After Mikael finished speaking, he saw Mebius biting his finger and looking at him with a smile on his face. "How can you say it? It's amazing that you can guess their answers accurately without any communication. Doctor, you know this is not something that can be achieved by guessing, so this is the fact." Mebius sneered, and Mikael couldn't understand her thoughts, so he decided not to speak. "Oh. So how did you survive? Why didn't those mimetic creatures attack you? Do you know that? This crappy excuse doesn't even believe the fire moth group of idiots, and you didn't accept further investigation because they dissected the body of the lawmaker and studied her core, which confirmed this statement. That's all. And if the case submitted by Spacei just now hasn't been modified by me, you should know the consequences." And Mebius took out a player and placed it by his bedside. Mikael turned his head and saw that it was playing the scene of himself holding a railgun as he first landed facing the second law. "You're actually a lawmaker, right?" Mikael took a deep breath and instead of answering directly, he asked in reverse. "Equivalent exchange, doctor, if you have any requirements, feel free to mention them." Mebius was taken aback for a moment, and she covered her mouth and chuckled, trembling along with her slightly oversized white coat. "I've never seen a mouse that cooperates like you before. So, I'm even more interested in you. I feel honored about this." "No, it's not an honor. You should feel fortunate because I'm interested in you, so I will take extra care of you in future experiments. At least, until I thoroughly study you, I will keep you alive." Mikael remained silent, and when Mebius saw the situation, he roughly tore off his saltwater. "I am very reasonable. You can leave now to attend the celebration ball of the fire moth. But I will always be waiting for you in my laboratory. You shouldn't get lost, right?" Friendly reminder, Mebius patience is not good. I hate waiting for others, so if you want to come to me, you need to do it as soon as possible. I don't know when these truths in my hands will appear on the table of the senior management of the fire-chasing moth. Mikael silently put on his clothes and walked out of the hospital room. Mebius bit his finger and watched as the young man walked out of the hospital room, wondering if he was asking the other person or asking himself, a lawmaker who fights for humanity. Obtains power from the gods and uses it to resist them. Is this really possible? Mikael's footsteps stopped at the entrance of the ward. Who knows? Perhaps we gained power from the gods' hands just to pull them down from the throne. Mebius squinted her eyes and was in a daze for a long time until the figure disappeared. Then she sneered, I seem to have found the direction, the goal of human evolution. Oh, I'm a bit reluctant. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Victor's Ball. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Victor's Ball. As they walked out of the ward, doctors and nurses in white coats came and went, making the pink nap on the nearby bench particularly eye-catching. Mikael pursed her lips and stood not far away, leaning against the corner of the wall, looking at her head bit by bit with interest. Ellie seemed to feel something. When she opened her eyes, her gaze was still a bit hazy, but for the first time she saw Mikael wearing a hospital uniform with a smile on her lips. Hey! You're getting better so quickly. Don't you need to rest a little longer? She jumped up in an instant and naturally took Mikael's arm, stuffing a cold blue gemstone into his hand. Mikael was taken aback, her lips moved, and eventually turned into a sigh. At that moment. The beauty of that moment almost made him lose his mind. It was not until he grasped the core of the law without temperature that he suddenly realized a fact. This was a world of collapse towards the countdown, and the smile of the girl in front of him was a beauty that would eventually shatter and dissipate. But it is the enemy of humanity and the apostle of the gods. Is it really possible to obtain power from the gods and use it to resist them? Mebius's words echoed constantly in his mind. Humans must have discovered the absence of the uniformity, how long can they hide it? When humans discover the second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, how should humans deal with themselves when they discover that all other lawbreakers lack human consciousness? Or will the collapse really not erode him again in the opposite direction? Hey! What's wrong with you, Mikael? Alicia felt the silence of the people around her and couldn't help but wonder, is it still uncomfortable somewhere? Do you want to take a break? No need, let's go. Ellie tilted her head and was momentarily puzzled as to why Mikael suddenly became cold. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and quickly lowered her head to conceal her disheartened expression. When she lifted her head again, she picked up her old smile. She grabbed Mikael's hand and ran down the narrow aisle. Hurry up. Going now happens to catch the victory party. Wait a moment, Alicia, we still need to go through the discharge procedures first. Half an hour later, in the huge banquet hall inside the base. The huge circular French window contained the setting sun that is about to fall into the mountains, and good wine and food are displayed together without stint. No one is needed to host it, and there is no one to host it. Everyone is holding up their glasses and reveling, some indecent people are rudely stuffing delicious food into their mouths, and the spilled gravy and cream are flowing all over the precious carpet, as if afraid that this will be the last dinner. I don't know who brought a vintage phonograph and put on the record. Eden's voice flowed out like a clear river, slowly enveloping everyone. The beautiful voice floated back and forth in his ears, making people unable to resist swaying gently. Along the way, anyone who recognized Ellie and Mikael toasted them one after another. It's okay if they couldn't recognize them, as they still wore the logo of the fifth team on their uniforms. An uncle whom Mikael had never seen before came up and hugged his neck. Good kid. You're lucky. You're amazing. You drank this glass of wine. Mikael was pricked by his curly beard, causing him to ache. For a moment, he forgot about his previous troubles and showed a bitter smile on his face. Fortunately, Ellie pulled him out in time and jokingly waved her hand to the uncle whom Mikael didn't even know. Uncle. Mikael is not yet of age. If you don't bring 2 bottles of good wine for his birthday in 2 years, it's hard to justify it. Okay, it's a deal. In private, Mikael quietly grabbed Ellie and said, "Do you know him?" Ellie stuck out her tongue and said, "Of course not." Suddenly, a burst of cheers erupted from the crowd ahead. Mikael tiptoed up and looked around. The crowd in front formed a circle, with the familiar fiery red at the center. When the 2 of them squeezed into the front of the crowd, Baimihu had already finished dancing. The woman next to her smiled shyly and awkwardly looked at a woman with blue and gray hair in the crowd. Baimi exhaled a long breath, closed her eyes, raised her head, and bathed in the brilliant lights and applause. She shook her head, her curled red hair suddenly scattered, beads of sweat splattered all over her head, and under the light, their paths became colorful. "Is there anyone else coming?" Her eyes shone brightly like the lights, even though it was a question. Her gaze was fixed on Mikael standing in the front row. Mikael silently lowered his head. Upon seeing this, Alicia covered her mouth and chuckled lightly, then suddenly kicked Mikael from behind and kicked him onto the stage. Mikael let out a bitter smile, but there was no time to refuse, so he was pulled over by Baimihu. Her cheeks blushed slightly and she forced a smile, saying, "It's okay to borrow you from Ellie for 2 minutes, isn't it?" Seeing such a boy walking onto the stage, the crowd of onlookers suddenly erupted with boos, but when they saw the other badge of the 5th team on his arm, it slowly quieted down again. Many people once again only realized that they had won the battle against the collapse, but had not had time to reflect on what they had lost. It was obvious that the 5th team, consisting of only 3 people, was like a heavy hammer hitting them hard in the heart. Many people cannot help but wonder. Did they really win this battle against collapse? Collapse can make a comeback, but their lost comrades cannot be resurrected. Even if you kill the second lawgiver, what you get is nothing more than a human remains. The cost of collapse in this battle that determines human destiny is nothing but a negligible force. This is the winner's party, but none of those present are winners. In just a few seconds, before this despair could spread, the dark cloud that enveloped everyone's heads was dissipated by the blazing flames. I can only say that I am truly humble. As long as there is her, the soldiers can always maintain high morale. Chen hugged her chest with both hands and said thoughtfully. Humph. Blanca snorted coldly beside her, leaving her at a loss. He casually looked for a topic and said, "Blanca, the body of the second lawgiver has just been collected. Don't you need your help with Dr. Mebius?" Blanca turned her head, widened her eyes, rolled her eyes, and walked away in anger. Leaving only a trace, one person was scattered in place. That trace instructor. What's wrong, Ellie? Is there a possibility that Blanca took a special leave to accompany you? Mark remained silent for 2 seconds, then turned around and chased after him. The scars are still the same, and I am too insensitive to Blanca's feelings. Ellie turned around, and the people in the frenzy occupied the stage, with one pair after another of men and women dancing gracefully in it. Baimihu grabbed Mikael's hand and reached out to Ellie. "Nah. Return your guardian to you." "Guardian, what does it mean?" Mikael asked curiously. "Ah. Don't you know? Ellie's name means eternal paradise, and Mikael means, the guardian of paradise. I thought your names were chosen with a heart." Alicia looked at Mikael and blinked mischievously, as if she had already known the meaning behind their names. She naturally took Mikael's hand and jokingly drew a circle in his palm with her index finger. Mikael could only smile helplessly, with an indescribable fatigue in his smile. As they moved away from the crowd, Baimihu's smile gradually faded. Finally, the 3 of them found a seat by the window and sat down. Unconsciously, the moon was already hanging in mid-air. Baimehu picked up his glass, as if to hold a cup of moonlight. But ultimately, it won't be as I wish. Until no longer seen by a fourth person, she slowly shed a tear. Sorry, I'll go to the restroom. She choked up and said. Actually. The captain's heart is sadder than anyone else, Mikael sighed. There are 18 people. If you say no, then there's nothing. She has to pretend to laugh and cheer for the other soldiers. Alicia fell silent in a rare way. In a moment, she squinted her eyes and smiled. Mikael, just smile. Don't be so heavy. I don't know what Dr. Mebius said to you, but aren't we victorious? Just smile, okay? I love Mikael, who is smiling the most. Mikael tugged at the corner of his mouth, but couldn't bring out an embarrassed smile. Alicia, can you wipe away your tears before you tell me this? I'm sorry. I didn't even remember all the names of those warriors. And, besides, the second law, why did she? Mikael lowered his head and silently reached out his hand to help Ellie wipe her tears, while deceiving himself and saying, maybe this is just an exception. Maybe it's just that the second lawyer is more dedicated. Maybe the third lawyer is just as unprofessional as me. Ellie was forced to laugh at Mikael's strange metaphor. She suddenly grabbed Mikael's hand, wiping her tears, and held it tightly. Mikael, tell me that you are the one who truly exists by my side. Okay. You will never leave me, will you? I assure you, Alicia. But you also have to promise me one thing. If one day you realize that I am no longer me, then all you need to do is put the gun on my forehead, gently pull the trigger, and you can save countless lives. Please don't hesitate. End of this chapter.